Hello, and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Tech Exec podcast. I'm your host, Aviv Ben-Yosef, a advisor and consultant to tech execs worldwide. And as always, we'll be talking about tripling impact per engineer. Our subject today is board games. Before we get to that, two quick reminders. One is Israel is still at war. We still have 139 people, if I remember correctly, held hostage in Gaza over 11 weeks now, and we're hoping to get some progress there. Second, thank you for everyone who joined the 2024 Launchpad last week. I had a blast. I think it was good. I got some good feedback. If you didn't sign up and you want to get the summary handout that I sent to everyone, send me an email. It's in the show notes and I'll send you a copy. I'm not making the recording itself public. Sorry about that, but you can and should sign up to my newsletter so that next time you won't miss it. Now, let's talk about board games. I'm not talking about, the actual board games like the Monopoly I play with my kids, but about how you handle your board, because that has a remarkable impact on how some founders and executives behave. So I work mostly with tech executives, but also work, for example, with CPOs and CEOs. And it is clear that some founders and some executives are more prone to handle the board in a way that's just not good. And when you allow that to happen, I understand the fact that at the end of the day, formally, the board is the one in charge of the entire company. However, as with any good executive who I tell to manage up the CEO, you need to be doing the same with the board and not become subservient. Because when you do that, you are actually harming the company and the board and yourself. So, first, I want to start with a few examples which I have seen several times, each of these, and therefore I believe these might be things that will sound familiar to you and will help you realize these patterns where you're not doing your role. One is when we do things just to appease the board. So, for example, I was talking to a couple of founders who decided to promote someone and give him a title of VP, even though I told them that person wasn't ready, even though I told them there was no real reason to do it at that stage, etc. And also, this was just locking them to someone who just might not be a good fit. However, they decided to do that with all of those things in mind. Why? Because the board told them they need to have some VP level people to show on their website by X months. And can you think of a dumber reason to give someone a title when they're not ready for it, when you might have to replace them? I have no issues with that specific person, and I believe that now, after a while, he is still operating pretty well. However, the problem is that when you do that, you are not being the executive you ought to be, and you're not making decisions based on the right motives. Another example is when you allow the board stress to disturb the entire operation of the team. So, for example, I know companies where it has become routine that in the 2 weeks or even a month leading up to the board meeting, for many companies that's like twice a year, when you have that, you get like an iteration or two that are wasted because what we end up doing seems to be focused on playing the numbers and adjusting them so that we get some wins to show specific progress and to show specific metrics as better than they were in the previous time, just so the board would not feel like something's wrong. And oftentimes, this is because those metrics are not as important because the company has decided to pursue different things, but the founders don't want to be too explicit about it, afraid about how it's going to look, whatever. And this is generally a catastrophe for the productivity of teams because when you do that, your teams, first of all, learn that this dishonesty is something that we do in the company, which is bad. Two, you're ruining their focus and setting them on a different path that's going to take a while to recenter on the important stuff after the board meeting. And third, whenever you do that, you are accumulating more and more work that has no real value afterwards. So it's not just about the time you lost, but it's also about maintaining whatever code that was written, whatever PR you made, etc., that you don't believe in. And these all together really weigh down on a company with time. You might not feel it after the fourth board, but after the second, the third, etc., these all weigh you down, and it creates a culture that's really unhealthy. And another last example is when you yourself are not being prepared enough, and therefore the board seems to create too much disruption in your plans, even though when it shouldn't. So if you come to the board unprepared and you try and explain things in a way that's not serious enough, it is not uncommon for them to mistrust it and decide to ask you to postpone something, do it differently, provide them with more data. And these cause delays. These are problematic. And for example, concretely, I saw companies where a very routine change in how people are getting their benefits had to be postponed by months because the founders didn't explain it well enough to the board, and the board felt like someone was trying to get some kickback. Only after this was discussed in more details, etc., this was okay, but the mere discussion has caused things to get more tense in the board. Another example is when you have a strategic shift that you want to do. You want to change how you look at your metrics, for example, 2 months or 3 months into the year. And if you don't explain it well enough, the board might sense that you're just being capricious. You don't see progress within a couple of months and you decide to shift plans once more. But if this is not something capricious, if this is based on real insights, etc., if you just say it as part of a board meeting, you have a slide that just says we're changing from this to that, this might be a shock for them. Therefore, if you're not preparing the board, you're going to end up in a worse position. So what do you need to do? You have to learn not to game the board as in, the negative connotations we have with this verb of gaming someone, but you have to learn how to play it in a way that allows you to maintain a steady rhythm, get what you need across, and help everyone make it through these boards without undue problems and changes to your plans. Therefore, you have to learn to push back. You don't just do things to appease them if it's going to have a bad impact on your business. You have to stop trying to make the numbers look better just because there's a board coming up. You should be in constant discussion and communication so that you're not in this grave fear when a board meeting approaches. You need to learn how to prepare them. Therefore, if there's a big change, if there's something you want to convince them in, don't wait for the board itself. Communicate with the people before, one-on-one, supply them the background so that when it comes to the board, people are not surprised. And this is more of a routine discussion that has to happen for due process. And lastly, make sure that the board sees things at the right level. I see many times that we try and bring in executives and have them share things going on because we want the board to see the executive team. However, when you don't give your executives enough guidance about how to speak to a board, this is a waste of time at best, and at worst, this seems to pull the board into too many tactical decisions, because if the executives share things that are not at the right altitude about the number of people they have, how many people they're going to hire, people who left, whatever, all sorts of things like that, they are very tactical. The board often comments about it, asks questions about it, because, if you're showing me something, I'm going to reply. And this just drags the discussion to the wrong altitude. So learn how to leverage having a board into making decisions faster, getting them on your side, getting more input on things that you're not as well experienced in. Don't make this a body that's used to direct you too much, because at the end of the day, you and your team know the business best. You're there day to day. You understand what's going on. They have the advantage of being external and maybe experienced, but you're the ones who see day to day everything, and therefore don't allow them to shut off your instincts. Okay? It's good to get criticism. Maybe you're missing something, but really by default, most of the times, you should already be thinking about whatever they're going to be raising. And if that's not happening, you need to be doing your homework better. All right, that's it for this week. Thank you for joining me. And as always, check out the show notes for my regular newsletter. And since this is the last episode of 2023, wishing you happy holidays, and I'll see you in 2024.